Thank you all for joining today. And so the preview that I would like to give here, basically we'll be reviewing why design thinking is the key to achieving the best data-driven customer experience. As a disclaimer up front, I want to let you all know I'm not a technical person. I am not a data engineer. I'm not a data scientist, but I specialize in customer experience in being able to link conceptual ideas to be able to drive an effective strategy. And that's what we do at MastermindAI. So part of reality, as we all know, is customers have an extremely high expectation when it comes to engaging with companies. And their expectations are so high that 84% of customers consider the experience just as important as the product or the service. And that was published on some recent research from Salesforce from the State of the Connected Customer report just a few months ago. Additionally, 75% of customers expect companies to use new technologies like artificial intelligence to create better experiences. And for these companies that are completely missing the mark, they'll see that brand trust is extremely difficult to keep. So companies need the smart way to use data for personalized, valuable, and proactive experiences. But even for the companies with the most sophisticated AI deployed to meet customer demand, as we've seen, data strategies fail a lot. So in this preview, let's explore why these data strategies fail. First, on one hand, customers don't feel that their needs are being met. They're not being heard. And on the flip side, data engineers and data scientists are focused on gathering relevant data in the right format and at a low cost, rightfully so. However, what constitutes relevant in this case? And because data engineers and data scientists are focusing on what they deem as irrelevant, sometimes there is a disconnect between what customers feel are important versus what data engineers and data scientists view as important. And because of that, they're calibrating their aim for a very specific target. But as I mentioned, if there is that disconnect, it turns out they can be completely off the mark here. And so the common question from this standpoint is, how do we aim better? However, if you pose a challenge question from this point, it implies that the challenge is a technical problem, but in reality, it's not. The real problem here is that it's a customer experience problem. So if we were to reframe the question to reflect the customer-centered experience, first of all, are we aiming at the right target? And here's the reason why it's very important to approach these challenges this way. Design thinking, there's a lot of different definitions out there, but what it all boils down to is that it's the approach to a challenge from a human-centered point of view. You may have heard of customer-centric, customer-centered. They all more or less mean the same thing. And the framework here, this is a gross oversimplification of the design thinking process. But for purposes of this presentation, I'll walk through what the use case is specifically. Excuse me. So first you start with the personas. And so when you begin with a persona, you have pain point 1, pain point 2, pain point 3. You're going to uncover multiple pain points. In the next step, you ideate off of these perceived pain points. And what we alleviate from these pain points are the perceived business values that you can prove. And once you iterate rapidly and test, you validate this proof of concept. And once you validate the proof of concept, you get the green light to build. And the targets that you build, or what we decide to build here, presumably become your fundamental new targets. So you're not completely aiming off the mark. You've actually built the correct targets for your customers and what they care about. And here's the reason why design thinking, when it's deployed, this is why it's so important. The Wall Street Journal just recently published an article a few weeks ago about AT&T. Now, this is an example of them not using design thinking. So just a few snippets here. So the article talks at length at artificial intelligence and how it's being used to gauge customers' behavioral patterns and personalities to pair them with customer service agents. I won't get into the other snippets here, but what it all boils down to is that AT&T was trying to answer the challenge question, how do we use AI to increase the chances of a positive outcome at the least costly intervention point? Now, but the problem with that is that you're actually looking at a very specific point in the customer journey. And you are actually missing out on all the other touch points of the real customer journey where there are opportunities to apply new thinking and to create innovative solutions. And if you look at the dashed line, theoretically, if that were the point that the customer was actually engaging with the agent over the phone, your solutions are actually limited to very specific and often ineffective points in this overall customer journey. Which is the reason why you would come up with lackluster solutions like employing artificial intelligence to match customer behavioral patterns with customer service agents. So what we should be thinking about is how do we use AI in a more effective way? Because in this example, as described in the Wall Street Journal, this is a reactionary solution using a technology that's supposed to anticipate the needs, not react to them. So if we were to reframe this question from a human-centered point of view, we would be asking, how might we communicate solutions to our customers in a personalized way that encourages them to engage with our brand? This question actually addresses the entire customer journey. So with that being said, you're able to actually understand what constitutes the low points, midpoints, and all the way up to the high points of what contributes to the touch points along the customer journey. And here's an example. I won't delve into this right now, but it's an example of how many detailed touch points there are throughout a customer journey from start to finish. And as we revisit the point where you actually build these points with your new targets with a more focused strategy, it is only then that you should be thinking about the question, what data and what tech is actually needed to support your new data strategy? And from here, it's a very common question, do we decide to buy or build? But the most important takeaway here is you may or may not already have the data to support this new strategy. And in the instance where you don't have this data, when you apply design thinking, you're actually allowing the capability to build a product that users actually want to use. And when you are building a product or buying a product that users actually want to use, you're actually supercharging the data collection and data gathering process. And so wrapping this up, in the full version of my talk, I will go more into depth on the concepts that I've introduced today. So how a customer-centric approach supercharges data collection for your data strategy, and how data scientists and data engineers alike can have a more focused data discovery plan through an informed lens, and having a viable strategy to gather high volumes of data, which are the right data with the right target. And of course, categories of errors that can be avoided by using design thinking, as well as their use cases. So thank you all so much for joining. And
I present more interactively. So yeah, I'll begin with kind of a thought experiment for everyone here. If I told you as a business leader that I had a great new concept for an innovative new platform using AI, machine learning, any other kind of emerging technology, and I came to you and I said, and let's assume you're my boss, I've got this great idea, and I said to you, yeah, I've got this concept and I've also got a crystal ball, and my crystal ball tells me that I've got an 8% likelihood of this POC, this pilot, this prototype, delivering a measurable business outcome. Ask yourself if you would invest in this pilot. I delivered a workshop on this topic at a conference in San Diego earlier this week. About 600 people in the audience, and exactly 0 people told me that they would invest in it. Unfortunately, you are investing in it. 1 in 13 proof of concept programs, pilot programs in the AI space actually succeed. The vast majority, more than 90% fail to demonstrate any measurable ROI and fail to scale beyond the proof of concept stage. Why do we keep doing the same thing over and over? I am a really firm believer in the value of understanding the context of what we're building. I come from an engineering background. I'm a data scientist. I'm a design thinking focused person. And in this workshop, we're going to actually use really specific tactical ways to create solutions that matter. Because at the end of it, if we frame technology through the lens of business problems and the needs of users, AI really can solve business problems. I have no doubt about that. So the beginning of that is understanding what types of questions to ask. And one of the tools for asking those questions is using my favorite 3 words in the English language. And it's about curiosity. It's about asking how might we? And so regardless of what industry you're in, you can start thinking about different ways of framing opportunities. So rather than starting with a solution in mind, rather than saying we're going to use predictive analytics, we're going to use NLP, we're going to use neural networks or deep learning to solve a problem, let's start with what is the problem we're trying to frame. And we're going to go through very specific techniques for doing this type of ideation, specifically tuned to emerging technology. So how might we predict credit card fraud? It is a very common use case. I work with a couple of banks on this scenario. But how might we, in the manufacturing sector, replace parts before they break? How might we reduce asset downtime? How might we optimize inventory to be real-time availability and optimized geographically for those future failures? How might we understand a user's intent and desire? Think to yourself about Spotify or Netflix, who seem to be very good at almost magically, even Amazon and other online commerce platforms, magically creating an experience where they know what it is you want sometimes before you really present more interactively. So yeah, I'll begin with kind of a thought experiment for everyone here. If I told you as a business leader that I had a great new concept for an innovative new platform using AI, machine learning, any other kind of emerging technology, and I came to you and I said, and let's assume you're my boss, I've got this great idea, and I said to you, yeah, I've got this concept and I've also got a crystal ball, and my crystal ball tells me that I've got an 8% likelihood of this POC, this pilot, this prototype delivering a measurable business outcome. Ask yourself if you would invest in this pilot. I delivered a workshop on this topic at a conference in San Diego earlier this week. About 600 people in the audience, and exactly 0 people told me that they would invest in it. Unfortunately, you are investing in it. 1 in 13 proof of concept programs, pilot programs in the AI space actually succeed. The vast majority, more than 90% fail to demonstrate any measurable ROI and fail to scale beyond the proof of concept stage. Why do we keep doing the same thing over and over? I am a really firm believer in the value of understanding the context of what we're building. I come from an engineering background. I'm a data scientist. I'm a design thinking focused person. And in this workshop, we're going to actually use really specific tactical ways to create solutions that matter. Because at the end of it, if we frame technology through the lens of business problems and the needs of users, AI really can solve business problems. I have no doubt about that. So the beginning of that is understanding what types of questions to ask. And one of the tools for asking those questions is using my favorite 3 words in the English language. And it's about curiosity. It's about asking how might we? And so regardless of what industry you're in, you can start thinking about different ways of framing opportunities. So rather than starting with a solution in mind, rather than saying we're going to use predictive analytics, we're going to use NLP, we're going to use neural networks or deep learning to solve a problem, let's start with what is the problem we're trying to frame. And we're going to go through very specific techniques for doing this type of ideation, specifically tuned to emerging technology. So how might we predict credit card fraud? It is a very common use case. I work with a couple of banks on this scenario. But how might we, in the manufacturing sector, replace parts before they break? How might we reduce asset downtime? How might we optimize inventory to be real-time availability and optimized geographically for those future failures? How might we understand a user's intent and desire? Think to yourself about Spotify or Netflix, who seem to be very good at almost magically, even Amazon and other online commerce platforms, magically creating an experience where they know what it is you want subheads before you.
Perfect. My name is Asya Bradley. Just give you a quick introduction on who I am and what I'm going to be presenting on. So I actually work for a company that does ID verification, and that's kind of my focus whenever we're looking at the application of AI. Like Nicole, I myself am not a technologist. I've worked in technology for a very long time, and I have worked often on the product side. And my interest in AI is more on the ethics piece. And so for me, my focus has always been on the identity side and how AI is used in financial services to bring accessibility to more individuals without causing or introducing ways to discriminate against individuals. So quick intro, as the VP of partnerships at Socure, we are a proprietary and patented full service machine learning platform, and our focus is only on IDV. And so that's where my focus is going to be even throughout the presentation. I did want to set the stage. And so what I did for this presentation was pull in a lot of different, I guess, leaders in AI thought and in organizational behavior and in consulting, and sort of pulled in data points from their recent studies in terms of why AI and why in the financial services in particular. Ramy mentioned the different ways that AI can be added, for example, in manufacturing or equipment maintenance, et cetera. But, my focus is really in the financial services. So what you're seeing here in that chart on the right is how, AI and advanced analytics is really affecting virtually every part of our economy. But in particular, that big blue bubble there, that's the financial services and insurance sector. So you see it kind of hitting everywhere. But, what we found in PwC's 2019 AI survey is that in terms of what, we're looking at in terms of financial services executives, is that you're seeing an increase in revenue and profits, just from AI efforts in terms of what executives are expecting. We're also looking at better customer experiences, and that's one of the things that I really look for. And obviously innovative new products that hopefully will also lead to better customer experiences. I really loved this, and I put sources in the actual notes, guys. So if anybody wants to know where these sources are and who I'm quoting, feel free to reach out and I can send you the different links to the different reports. So AI has the power to change almost everything about the way that we do business, and it'll contribute up to about 15.7 trillion to the global economy by 2030. And so, Ramy, as you were saying, like with that 8%, possibility of success, why would anyone want to take that risk? Well, people keep buying lottery tickets, right? And the odds are much worse there. So here, when you've got that, option of actually doing a lot more than just a lottery ticket, I can understand why people keep jumping on that bandwagon. To start with, there's a lot of question about what is AI, right? So I'm going to just take the WF and Deloitte definition that they put together in one of their recent reports, just so we have a framework, and let's agree on this definition so we can, figure out what our conversation is about. AI is a suite of technologies. It's enabled by adaptive predictive power, and it does exhibit some degree of autonomous learning. And the point of it is that as human beings, we're not able to compute these massive amounts of data and action them in a way, even though we've got the intellect for it. So how do we use computers to help us in terms of doing these things, such as recognizing patterns, anticipating future events, creating good rules, making good decisions, and then, and this I thought was really neat, was communicating with other people. These things are constantly changing. And so, let's say that this is our framework for now. And then, obviously the conversation changes. I've noticed on a month-to-month, week-to-week basis sometimes, especially within our organization. Different applications for AI in financial services in particular. And I won't be touching on all of these, or I may actually for the larger presentation, since we do have an hour there. Again, I'll focus on that last point, AI and fraud detection and prevention. But obviously, things that are interesting to me or important to me are AI and credit decisions. You want to make sure that as you're building out your AI models that you're not disadvantaging certain groups of people that might otherwise not show properly in AI. AI in risk management, AI in quant trading, and this has been really neat with the advent of a lot of the fractional share opportunities that have come out. And then obviously AI in the organization, and so that's sort of the back office automation, and I think that's going to increase the profitability of specific organizations. And then finally, what consumers are generally seeing, and where a lot of the B2B space of AI providers are really kind of powering these AI and personal finance management tools that you're seeing nowadays. AI in the organization, I did want to pull into that real quick. How do you use AI to turn something that would be considered a support function, otherwise a cost center, into a profit center? And so this was again from that WF and Deloitte report, where they really, I thought was really neat, was how they talked about these B2B type of functions growing, where, even if you've built an AI function internally to sort of automate your own back or front office, that you essentially become a service provider for those that have not, gone ahead and made that investment in that 8% possible success product. So having that AI in the back office to be able to automate things, reduce your HR costs, and then being able to reskill your entire organization to be able to function with and operate and really understand the applications of AI. And then obviously you're going to have those cultural shifts. So you'll see that I talk a lot about, how it affects humans and how AI and human interaction is going to happen, and how partnerships are going to be much more important as AI becomes a lot more commonplace in our world. AI and personalized banking, and this is again just highlights of things that I find particularly fascinating. I have, I'm of the school that personalized banking, saving, being able to save toward a house, a mortgage, purchasing, a major purchase like a car, etc., needs to be set up in a way that we take, electricity for granted, or, plumbing for granted. I'm excited about seeing things set up by these amazing fintechs that you can pretty much just set it and forget it. So there are a lot of providers out there like Tally, a lot of these awesome challenger banks like, Vero Money, Chime, Stash, that essentially just let you sign up, log in, authenticate who you are, but then they're all using AI to be able to find ways to get you to a point where you're financially secure and financially stable. So I personally find that really fascinating. And Nicole, you were talking about like customer experiences and customer loyalty, and this was, I thought was neat, pulling back into your presentation about AI being a new battlefield for customer loyalty. So if in the past, and Ramy, you mentioned, like, if you get these false positives, what does that do? How does that affect customer loyalty? You immediately think about switching. But, how do you find a way that keeps your customers there with you, finding that perfect balance between getting the support and service you need without all the nuisances of the false positives? So my focus, again, is on this problem, the fraud detection prevention. So those are just previews of some of the other topics, but here's where I really get excited. Data breaches are commonplace. Everyone's data has been breached. All of your data is out there. I like to say everybody knows by now, my favorite fruit is mango and I love to do yoga. So if you're trying to KBA me, that's not going to help you because everyone knows this about me. And if they don't already know it from knowing me personally, they'll know it from, whatever has been leaked on the internet. Our social security numbers were already leaking. Fraudsters are evolving. So with the advent of AI and more AI being applied in financial services, our fraudsters are also evolving. Most of the services that we are seeing our financial services providers use are still pretty antiquated. So they're not taking that plunge toward that 8% success rate. They really are kind of sitting back on the sidelines and not knowing what to do. Our demographics of the world are changing. So, that traditionally what people thought was a thin file of, well, maybe that's a fresh graduate who just doesn't really have any money, or maybe it's that, new immigrant into the country again that just doesn't have identity. But I think the profile of who can be considered a thin-filed individual or someone that, you know, relatively sits outside of the credit system is changing. Also, that demographic of the individual that really doesn't want to have to show up into a bank branch, you know, or show physical documents like utility bills or whatever, you know, to identify themselves. All of this is changing. And that's where we need to really try and focus and see how can we use AI to bring us to that level where we're able to identify individuals in a safe way, in a non-discriminatory way. Now, if you ignore the little branded piece here, I do love this chart because it kind of shows us where we can head toward in the AI world and financial services. Where traditionally, you know, we started off just hitting credit bureau data. We're maybe starting to look at device intelligence on phones. And then, you know, when we started to think, oh, we're kind of getting snazzy, we're kind of understanding a little bit, we threw in some risk engines and maybe we threw in some ML rules. But, you know, the majority of the financial services industry is here. In all my conversations and partnerships, I've found people are generally in these like bottom 6, sort of 3 up and 2 across row. And that's kind of where they sit and kind of remain just waiting on the sidelines. But what we need to really get to, if we're ultimately going to get to the point where we're really applying AI, and obviously there's so much uncharted that we don't even know about, this is sort of where our goalpost is for now. I talked a little bit about partnerships, and this is going to play a little bit of a stronger role. As a previous founding team member of Synapse Financial Technologies, what we did was we built banking APIs. I believe very strongly in the partnerships between the incumbent financial service providers as well as the fintechs that are coming out. I would love to provide some examples of successful partnerships that are out there. So with, sponsor banks that are opening up their doors to be able to support the Chimes of the world, for example, like Bancor and Chime, I think it is. So those are the kind of things that I do want to look at. But the key point in this slide is the data, the sharing and access to larger amounts of data. And what you're seeing here, for example, in the traditional model, which is what most companies and most incumbents are employing, is where you'll have a bad actor that goes and bounces from institution 1, and maybe they get accepted or rejected. But that same bad actor can easily jump to institution 2 and jump to institution 3 and try their luck. With this collective solution that I think we all need to start looking toward, and in terms of our data partnership, is where if they go to the institution 1, they do something bad there, that information can then be used to prevent them from even trying at institution 2 or trying at institution 3. And that's kind of where we're trying to get to, is a little bit more of that shared amount of data. Again, keeping in mind that we don't want to discriminate against anybody, but here's where I want to leave you as the last slide. This I loved because it came out of, again, from the PwC report that I can reference. But I loved these 6 questions or 5 questions that they said to ask yourself as a company when you're trying to employ AI in your business. How can you move toward a path of developing a responsible AI? And I love that. And step number 1 is fairness. Are you minimizing bias in your data and AI models? Are you addressing this bias when you use AI? Part of this for me is very important, that you have a very diverse team to ensure fairness. I'll give you an example. At Synapse, at one point, we had developed an algorithm that we thought was fantastic. We went out and deployed it, and we found that an entire subset of our community was being discriminated against. So it just heavily was biased against the community. At that point, it was because we had a very strong, diverse team that dissension was allowed, that arguments were allowed, that basically we ultimately decided, obviously, this was not an algorithm we could deploy given the results that it was giving. Even though everything was fantastic, we worked a lot on it, spent a lot of money, but the diverse team was able to stand up and say no to that. Interpretability. Can you explain how your AI is making these decisions? And this was, again, key in determining the fairness. So were you able to say, well, this is how that decision came through, and then are you able then to go in and make iterations if needed? Robustness and security. Is your system going to perform the way that you need it to? Is your system vulnerable to attack? So these are things, again, to keep in mind. And governance, who's accountable for your systems? Do you have the proper controls in place? I go back to this, actually. So this shows us the way that we actually have a model governance process internally, where our model actually is continuously, we have several different models, but we're continuously putting them through a cycle. But never should you see an AI model with a linear sort of path, but you want to see something that's cyclical, where there's that constant analysis, constant, in production monitoring live of what's happening. And then the last point is system ethics. There's a lot of this contention of fintechs being out here to disrupt and to push the envelope and keep moving things along. Yes, that's all great, but at the same time, you need to make sure that you're complying with regulations. How are these ethics going to impact your employees and your customers, and always keeping them in mind. And I always love to end that slide with those key people that are most important to us, our employers and our customers. And I'll end the presentation right there, folks.
Could you provide me with a few examples of AI startups that are impacting the back office automation? Speakers, any one of you want to take it? Fine.
Yeah, so a lot of the B2B SaaS platforms that you'll find that are connector platforms between banks and fintechs, for example, those are all good examples of sort of back office automation for the financial services industry. So for example, like what we're doing at Socure is really just focusing on taking away the KYC component from banks. So KYC is that's know your customer. And so what's happening right now is like you have to go and an agent actually has to physically look at your documentation, right? So you can imagine the costs associated with having to scan documents, store them, actually categorize them, and then making those decisions and communicating those decisions back to your consumer. And so companies like Socure, like Synapse Financial Technologies, like Oculus, all of these companies, what they're doing then is saying, here's another alternative. You can plug in via API, and this entire function becomes automated versus you having to go and put 100% of your people or consumers through this process. So what they can do is put everyone through it, and then whatever 15 or 10% cannot get automatically approved, those people can then go through the manual process. So you end up with a reduction of at least 50% in terms of the manual review costs and processes associated with it.
Good. Thank you for jumping in.
I would suggest the person asking those questions just to look at any of the challenger banks that have come out. So if they look at Stash, if they look at Money, if they look at Chime, even if they look at, for example, SoFi or Credit Karma. So essentially what they're also doing is making access to loans. So SoFi and Credit Karma, for example, they're like an aggregator of all the different, incumbents in that space. But in fact, they're a great, top of the funnel source for these incumbents. And so in what they do is they essentially eliminate several of the starting steps that these consumers would normally have to go through, which are a nuisance. But they can just do that online through these platforms and then still get fed through the traditional service.
Speakers, do you think robotic process automation, RPA, is part of a broader umbrella of all of this, trying to provide for back office as one example? I'm just trying to add on to the question that came in. RPA is a general category in which back office is only one of the categories of automation. Okay, any other questions yet? Don't see any. Okay, well, let me make sure that I don't hold the speakers too long, which is 10:57. There's one more, hold on one second. The same person wants to ask, are organizations using AI assistants during video, audio conferencing for auto note taking, etc. I think Nicole answered that question. Asya, I cannot recognize the voice. Anyone can go for it. I can repeat the question. Are organizations using AI assistants during video, audio conferencing for auto note taking, etc.?
I feel like NLP needs to get far more improved before that can be done 100% in real time. So I used to be, for example, an interpreter for documentaries, and it's such a nuance, that you kind of have to catch emotion. You have to catch, any sort of voice inflection. You have to be able to understand the interaction between the different relationships. So I think it may be able to factually capture data. I just don't know if it's there in terms of that human interaction piece quite, to be able to do the full piece. So to be honest, on our side, we still have real note takers that actually are in the meetings taking notes. So we are not there yet. I don't know if Ramy or Nicole, if your organizations are there.
Yeah, NLP is not there yet. Voice transcription is, so it depends on what the goal is. But I mean, Google will do that live, real time, multi-language if you're presenting through Google Slides. To have, for example, essentially real time closed captioning of content as it's being presented, which you can then flip into any sort of note application you wanted to from there, and also multilingual. So it can be done, but you're right. Gathering the intent from that would be a separate thing, and I don't know of anyone who's successfully doing that at scale at this point in time.
Yeah, I think we've got a long time going before we can start capturing emotion and intent, and sort of getting all the possibilities of human interaction. The humans are so complex. I think there's certain areas that are ripe for automation, and that was why, like in my presentation, I kind of mentioned those, 6 points that I thought were ripe for it. But the emotional piece, still, I think there's a long way to go.
Yeah, I agree to that point. And I mean, as far as organizations go, or enterprise-wide solutions that are using natural language processing and virtual assistants, AI assistants to be able to provide that service, I've personally used B2C solutions, and there is an app that I've just used out of curiosity called Voice AI. More than happy to send that over. And I agree that it still misses a lot of the nuances, and while it was designed for note-taking specifically, it's still not 100% to the point where I would be using it for any of my conferences or for any of my in-person meetings that I would have. So I agree that there is still quite a long way. So,
have any of you actually met or I guess heard of the AI robot, Sophia?
Yeah. Definitely,
right?
I've heard of Sophia. I have not used or met Sophia.
So I mean, she's supposed to be the most advanced when it comes to even like the emotional aspect, the sort of thinking of self, etc. Right? I mean, I find it all. I found her very fascinating. But so I did get a chance to meet her, and she was at a PR event, right? Where she was essentially, you could take a photo with her, you could ask her a couple of questions, and she would answer them and interact with you. And so I got up there and I was like, hey, I asked her a couple of questions, just the usual innocuous things. And then, I was like, hey, may I take a selfie with you? And she had no clue what a selfie was, right? So it's like, no matter how far advanced you get, there's certain things that just still are not going to be there, and selfie is not something like totally out of this world now. Like it's sort of, everyone knows what that is now, but Sophia didn't. And she's, an example of the most, advanced sort of personalized AI, right? Quote unquote humanoid. And I thought that was pretty neat.
Yeah.